So welcome to today's panel discussion on ESG and sustainability in the EMS world. ESG and sustainability have become increasingly important to all manufacturing companies. The impending Scope 1, 2 and 3 regulations are due to start being phased in some states in 2026. So it's going to bring an increasing number of challenges to manufacturing companies. Here to discuss these challenges is a very eminent panel. To my extreme left we have Jen Fijalkowski from McDermott Alpha. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
Okay. Next to her we have Clint Rohr from contract manufacturer Silicon Mountain. Welcome. Next to him we have Michael Henshaw from Green Circuits.
Trevor, good to be here.
Yeah, and then of course to my left here we have Anthony Ambrose from Data.io.
So, good to see you again, Trevor.
Yeah, good to see you again. Great. So let's get started, guys. It's a very big topic, so we'll get in as much as we can. I'll start off with you on the end there, Jen. So how are manufacturing companies currently integrating ESG principles into their operations and decision-making processes?
Yeah, sure. So McDermott Alpha is owned by a larger corporation known as Element Solutions Incorporated, or ESI. So ESI has been releasing ESG reports annually since 2020. So working towards our scope emissions goals of reducing them, and also by reducing our water consumption, has been an integral part of our internal operations. And the first part of that is data collection, right? So every single year we try to do our due diligence of increasing the accuracy of our reporting. And so by us better reporting our data, we're then able to better provide data to our customers who are using our materials, which contributes to their Scope 3 upstream emissions.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, Clint, it's absolutely right. I mean, it all starts with data collection. You've got to start there. Are you doing a similar exercise at Silicon Mountain?
So I think Silicon Mountain's got a little bit of a different angle on the ESG. Where we're looking at right now is a smaller company and trying to onshore. The ESG is really putting a damper on what we're able to do because the pricing continues to increase. And as inflation keeps going up, pricing keeps going up, it's really hard for consumers to actually review American companies for CMs in order to take care of their consumer-based needs.
Right. Okay. That's different. So, Michael, how are you approaching it?
Well, as a California-based business, we're already keenly aware of environmental impact and do a great many things to try and control and improve our operations. We track energy, we track water consumption, we even drive things into our employee base. I think the ESG is having us think about, in Scope 1, Scope 2, and as it migrates to Scope 3, for a smaller EMS, how are we going to be able to report to a larger company and customer as they start pushing it back to us? I don't think we have very good answers yet.
Right.
But there are things we are trying to do, encourage use of less harsh chemicals, encourage a migration away from lead, and then things that we can bring in-house and control, like our deionization of water and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Scope 1 regulations, which you have control of, are fairly easy to implement. But Anthony, I know that you're very environmentally aware up at Data.io.
Yes, and Data.io has a unique position here because we're publicly traded, as you know, on the NASDAQ. And so, as you can, I'll refer people to our 10K and proxy for our recent disclosures on this. So we look at ESG fundamentally in two different ways. Number one is a regulatory compliance. And you don't get a vote there. They tell you what you need to do, and the second is what customers demand. And so for us, we've tried to meld the requirements of regulatory compliance and what customers demand, so we can create one report that satisfies both needs. Now, for us, it's very straightforward. As a equipment manufacturing company with locations in China, the U.S., and Germany, we've taken a decision that we're going effectively net zero. Well, we're almost there right now.
So you're doing that worldwide?
We're doing it worldwide. We buy green power. We have carbon offsets for the natural gas and things like that. And we've gone to a policy of only electric or hybrid vehicles for company cars. And that covers the vast majority of it. We would have gone full electric, except the cost went crazy in the last year.
Yeah.
So when they come down, I think that might allow us to accelerate. The hard part is actually then documenting all of this. And documenting in a way that the customers want us to document it. It's one thing to say that you're net zero or your Scope 1 or Scope 2 are effectively zero, It's another thing to put it into a template in a format that your customers can use.
Is there no standard documentation that you have to use to report these emissions?
The customers are, yes, we have a standard. It's our standard. Do it our way, and then that should be good enough for everybody else.
Oh, really?
So there are third-party reporting companies. We have one customer that said, please use this template from a third party.
Yeah.
And if you don't use that one, there are a couple of others that are also acceptable. So I think we'll get to a point where it's generally standardized. I don't think we're there yet.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Going back to you, Jen, what are the main challenges faced by manufacturing companies in accurately measuring and reporting these emissions, especially in preparation for upcoming legislation? Now, as we just discussed there with Anthony, I mean, he's using his own reporting system. We're not at the point where we've got standards yet. What do you see happening in that respect?
Sure. So, as was just mentioned, it's the lack of standards that makes it challenging. Specifically, as a material manufacturer, what our customers are typically looking for are product carbon footprint reports. Mm-hmm. And there are the ISO standards that are out there, but in my opinion, they're a bit more of a dictionary than a reference guide. They do a good job of, reviewing the definitions of terminology, but they don't say what cutoff percentages you should follow or how you should specifically dictate your allocations. Mm-hmm. And so it leaves a lot of room for assumptions and interpretations, and it's up for us as reporters to, define all of those assumptions within our product carbon footprint reports. But that means that, a lot of our competitors can also make their own assumptions, and they may or may not disclose those. And we have found that although it's early for some companies, other companies are already using this data to select materials for their next generation devices. Mm-hmm. And without standards, it's a bit concerning because, if people are making decisions for these materials, we want to make sure that everyone's reporting in the same fashion. So we're seeing that as a challenge.
Right. So let me understand this. I mean, these emission things are coming. Are these guidelines, or it's not law?
So there are guidelines for creating. Well, there's three different main guidelines. There's one for life cycle inventory, so how to look through every single step of your process and how to collect data based on energy consumption, emissions, water usage. Waste, there's 20 categories that you can pick from. Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, there's the life cycle assessment, which views every step from cradle to grave, so from raw material, sourcing, all the way to end-of-life disposal. So they outline how you can conduct a life cycle assessment. And then finally, which I think is an important differentiator, is the product carbon footprint. So that's when you're only looking at the emissions data from cradle to, often it's cradle to gate, and what's meant by that is from raw material sourcing to when the product leaves our door or is received by the customer. And I think that it's important for the industry to differentiate. Life cycle assessments would have all those 20 impact categories versus product carbon footprints which just look at emissions. And I think a lot of customers are right now looking just at emissions because it's something that is a bit more easy to quantify. Mm-hmm. But in reality, when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about more than just emissions, but also about biodiversity. We're talking about human health. We're talking about more than just rising global temperatures.
Right. Okay. Clint, what's your view on this?
So this one I think really goes back to data collection. When everybody's talking about data collection, who's the driving force behind the data collection? And that's the governance of the ESG, right? So we are forced to make sure that we're following this data guidelines that the government is taking and giving funding to a lot of the larger companies in order for be able to maintain this type of data collection. Small companies like ours aren't able to put in the resources into that without really impacting the consumer base. And so my focus really is who's driving this and why is it coming from. Though I hate the carbon footprint, it's still in the best interest of the government and the larger companies in order to follow along these guidelines that they're trying to set for us.
Oh, I mean, I think it's I mean, I think these are obviously environmental legislation. It's good for everybody. But yeah, I take your point. The larger companies are going to be able to afford to implement it a lot easier than smaller companies like yourselves. Do you face that challenge, Michael?
We do. This reminds me a little bit of what we've seen going on in the defense industry in the United States, CMMC and cybersecurity. And the dilemma is that the larger companies are required to report. They each have a different structure that they want the information. And so when they come to a small company like us, we have data, but the question is how are we going to report it? How are we going to structurally give them what they need to get across the finish line? I think that's going to be one of the larger challenges over the course of the next year and a half as we manage our way through this process.
Right, but I mean, in systems like CMMC, for example, I mean, that you get audited on that. I mean,
Yes.
you have government auditors
Yes.
that come in and actually check that you're doing what you're meant to be doing.
They do, but you do have some options in how you get to the final solution, but you do have to hit the final target.
Yeah.
And I feel like this probably is going to end up in a very similar structure. There's going to be what's our carbon footprint, what's our water utilization, our waste, our recycling, but how it gets reported and what each of our customers requires is probably going to be a little bit different.
Right. Okay. So do you think, Anthony, this is something that needs to be driven by government legislation? It's not something that necessarily needs to be
I think
standards by the association?
Let me answer your question maybe a little bit indirectly, Trevor.
Okay.
If you look at a corporate structure, and I'll compare it to the financial world. The financial world, you have the Financial Accounting Standards Board. They say this is how you do it. This is what revenue recognition is like. These are the rules. There are changes. They give you time to implement them. It's all clear. The second part is you have people on the board that are well-versed and experts in this. You have auditors that are well-versed and expert in this. They all speak the same language.
Yeah.
And as a result, the debates around the correct answer tend to be very, very minor because it's quite clear and there's an installed base of expertise that's used to operating in a world that's very well defined. None of that exists yet in the environmental spec. Zero.
Yeah.
And cybersecurity even further behind. So at the risk of being controversial, this will fail until you get something similar to the audit committee, the SEC saying who's qualified to be an audit committee expert, auditors that are regulated and are able to say, yes, I'm allowed to audit these financials. And so you get that whole ecosystem of expertise that has a shared understanding of what constitutes success.
Right.
We're not there yet. We're not even close.
But from what you're saying, it's sounding like it needs to be a government-driven initiative rather than something from the trade association.
Or it could be, the government could say, you in the trade association, you go figure it out. Tell us what you think works. Remember, FASB is financial experts. The government uses them, but it's people that know what's going on and have an expertise in the field that are saying, we think these are the right rules.
Right.
Okay? I think something similar. It doesn't have to be top-down, but for example, who on the board of directors is considered an expert in environmental disclosure? There are no rules on that.
No.
There are very clear rules for who's able to be an expert on the audit committee and chair an audit.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's spec'd out.
Yeah.
So we need to get to that point or closer to that point, in my opinion, to have something that is broadly adopted and allows for the filtration from the big companies to the medium-sized companies to the small companies and have data effectively pass through. Until you get to that point, it's going to be a nightmare.
Yes.
Trevor, may I add something?
Yeah, you can.
So something else to add here is that there currently is a business behind sustainability reporting. There are softwares out there that help companies like mine, like yours, conduct like these life cycle assessments and that we can then release to our customers. And those softwares oftentimes include databases with emissions factors for raw materials that are used or equipment that's used, etc. But each database may have different numbers, and you aren't able to audit that data yourself, and you don't know how frequently it's being updated, and maybe it's an organization that provided that information that is trying to best represent those materials. So. And there's also a certain threshold for having access to that data because you then need to pay for it.
Right.
So I think a lack of standards and emissions factors is a challenge currently and will need to be faced because if the real goal here is for us to have clear reporting and for us to actually make improvements, I think in an ideal world there would be some sort of library that maybe that's something that IPC could help with, where companies like ours can help to submit data regularly that's updated and verified, audited, that people can then pluck from so that they can have the best data reporting available. But I think the fact that right now that there's a business behind these softwares and these databases makes it a bit challenging because it's intellectual
it's very
property
subjective.
in a way.
I mean, I think you really need to have the trade association, IPC, or a government, but preferably trade association actually, to create a level playing field so that everybody's comparing apples with apples. You can't have a situation where you have different private vendors coming in with their solutions. Let me see. Can you provide some examples of successful sustainability initiatives implemented by manufacturing companies to reduce their environmental impact and improve their ESG performance? Let's start off with you on that one.
Sure. One of the things that we do, and we've had success with our customers, is helping move them away from harsh chemicals, moving them away from lead into lead-free solder. And that typically takes a little bit of design effort, takes a little bit of R&D and a continued push, but that has a cascading effect all the way down the supply chain, and we've had some success. The other thing that we've done is the things that we can manage and control in-house, our efforts on water recyclability, on sustainability, both in our energy use and even frankly down to the employee level. Simple, basic stuff like distributing water bottles so we're not buying plastic and recirculating it back into the system.
Yeah.
So multiple layers, multiple different ways to approach.
Okay. Clint, have you got any specific examples?
I don't know about a specific example. So smelter reports are things that we focused on in the past. Lead-free is definitely a good one. So things that people actually are understanding of what we're trying to accomplish really drives that factor of what you're trying to do, right? So if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, how do you know how to move it forward? Right now with these smelter reports and these reports we have from companies that are overseas that are utilizing children for their output and whatnot. We're not allowed to use those types of manufacturers. I think that's a great thing for everybody, and we can see that impact. Whereas this right here, I don't see the impact that we're seeing on a short term because there is no regulation of it.
Okay.
I think also there needs to be an element of top-down leadership is saying what's aligned with our values, our customers, and our compliance. The conversation we had at Date.io at an executive staff level on how to get massive reduction in our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions was very, very easy, very, very quick.
Yeah.
We just said we're going to go buy green power, we're going to go buy carbon offsets, we're going to go change these policies. And you can make massive change very, very quickly. The last 5% is probably going to be the real challenging part. But why get hung up on that when you can take the first 95% very, very effectively?
Yeah.
The challenge for us is we have customers that are absolutely supportive of this, cheering us on, and others that are, we explain to them what we've done. We explain that, this is not free. And they go, well, that's great. And when we need it, that'll be great. But until we do that, we're not giving you a nickel more for your environmental policy.
Right.
So you end up with a barbell of customers, some that are absolutely demanding this, and others that could care less. And so, again, I think it's going to take some time to sort this out. But at a certain level, we've already made the commitment. We're done, and we're using it now, hopefully, as a competitive advantage for those customers that care.
Well, I would say in your case, it's not so much as a problem as it is for the smaller guys because, it's a direct cost to them. In your case, you're having that listed on your NASDAQ information, your ESG and sustainability information, so where people are making investment decisions based on it. So you're probably going to get investors who are very keen and supportive of environmental policies.
I would be real careful about, I think in the microcap world, there are very few people that care about ESG on an investment basis. In the mega cap world, Trevor, I think you're absolutely correct. But in the microcap world, none of the investors that I've talked to put a premium on ESG in their investment decisions. It's the customers that I serve that ultimately get us more revenue, which will help drive the things the investors pay for.
Right.
But I've yet to hear an investor in the microcap world demand ESG.
Right. Do you have a view on that, Jen?
Yeah, so in sustainability, there's two sides to the coin. There's the internal operations point, which we were speaking to, and so McDermott Alpha, we're at our core a chemical manufacturing company. So our investors are keenly aware of our impacts to the environment. So internally, we make strides for continuous improvement, and we do switch to green energy as we see the opportunities to, and our investors do see value in that. The other side of the coin is the sustainability values that we can provide to our customers. And yesterday I had the great fortune of being a part of the very first sustainability track within the technical conference, and I presented on a technology that is quite familiar, low temperature solders, but I introduced it in modern sustainability terms.
Right.
So I said if we are able to switch from SAC 305, which has a peak reflow temperature of around 245, to a low melting temperature solder melting at a peak reflow temperature of 190, we were able to achieve a reduction of scope 2 emissions of 32%. And we extrapolated that data out to a melting temperature of 150, and you were able to see scope 2 reductions of over 20,000 kilos of CO2 equivalent annually.
Right.
So that's one technology that is known that can be implemented with equal reliability to that of SAC 305 with our next generation alloys, and can also help to observe significant scope 2 emissions reductions. Additionally, there is a life cycle assessment out there from the International Tin Association, which has analyzed the impacts of different elements of tin production and usage. And in this report, it indicated that 26% of the global warming potential of a kilo of tin over its entire life cycle is attributed just to mining. So if you are able to engage with recycled tin in your soldering alloys, and you're able to move away from those scope 3 emissions. And so what is 26%? I've written down here. It's 1.72 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of tin. So that is quite significant. And as most of us in the soldering world know, tin is the most popular metal in alloys. So
Alloys, That is really interesting, actually. I didn't realize there was quite so much energy involved in the tin mining side. And certainly with regards to low temperature solders, I mean, a lot of these can be used in lower cost consumer goods.
Absolutely.
Which is an area that, of manufacturing where you could make some significant savings.
Yeah, so if the scope 2 emissions aren't drawing you in, then the energy cost savings might. And yes, it enables the use of temperature sensitive components, sometimes low cost and even flexible substrates, while offering in our next generation alloys equivalent drop shock performance as SAC 305.
Right. Okay, great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had some great debates around the topic today, and we're only at the very beginning of it in many ways. This is going to be something we'll be talking about for years to come, actually. So I want to thank you for giving us your input today. Jen Fidgelskowski from McDermott Alpha, Clint Rohr from Silicon Mountain, Michael Hinshaw, from Green Circuits, and of course Anthony Ambrose from Data.io. So thank you very much for taking part, and thank you very much to our audience for watching today.